hello everyone. My name is Joshua Mokry, second year MFA graduate student in photo. Before I begin, I just want to congratulate all of the other people in the show. I love all of the work. I think it's absolutely incredible, and we should feel very proud about what's being shown here. So the work that I'm going to be talking about for all of these pieces was created last semester. It kind of stemmed from this interest in online virtual worlds, video game spaces, and how kind of a personal narrative, me growing up in these spaces, interacting with reality in the physical world. This first piece is a video piece that includes bits of video taken outside of trees, plants, and bushes. And then behind it is a single video taken in the world of Warcraft, an online video game. So the bits of video that are taken in the real world go from different seasons, spring, autumn to fall. It is not organized or non-linear, so it's kind of jumbled in its time linearity, or jumbled in its time, pretty much. Behind it is just one single video taken above the different zones or ecosystems within the world of Warcraft. It starts in this very summery daylight area, going to a nighttime to daylight again in a very jungle ecosystem. So even though it is a very linear video, the nature of the video game is very accelerated and exaggerated compared to kind of our physics in a real world time. This piece for me is really all about the idea of commanding attention. So when you're online, in these online spaces playing these video games, if you've ever had a partner that has played a video game, it's hard to hold a conversation with them. So it very much immerses you. And I'm really thinking about this idea of the attention given from the screen, or commanded from the screen. So these kind of two worlds colliding and fighting with each other, the physical real world and the online virtual world. It is somewhat dizzying to look at, and that is intentional. I'm thinking about this idea of dizziness, also to hold your attention in a way. It's in this high foot traffic area, which I really like, even though it is a very quiet video with no sound. Visually, it's very loud and abrasive to me. So that's this piece. If you will all follow me, we're going to walk to the other four pieces that I will be talking about. Okay, so the first pieces I'm going to be talking about are these three. So once again, we're talking about this concept, this idea of the virtual world and the physical world interacting with one another, talking to each other, impeding on each other, fighting each other. So I grew up in these online virtual spaces. I've spent a lot of my time in them just as a very young child to now. And I'm really interested in kind of how these virtual worlds kind of shaped me and formed me and made me who I am today. So these two pieces right here, this one and this one, we have photographs of my home in Houston. We're on the outside of the house looking at it. They both include windows. The windows are important. I'm thinking of the window kind of like this portal, the same way I'm thinking about the computer screen. We look through a screen to look into this alternate world, this virtual world, the same way we look into a window to see a different space of this domestic space. This one in particular, so we have this idea of outside looking in, but this one, we have a screenshot photograph inside of a house in the World of Warcraft, and we're on the inside looking out. This is the window inside of the game. And so now I'm thinking about this idea of outside looking in, but also the inside looking back at me. So I'm interacting with this space, but it's also interacting with with my life. The more I'm immersed in these video games, the more it is changing my personality and driving decisions within the real world. This piece was real. So a lot of this work was inspired by an artist named Chao Fei. She's a Beijing artist that made a lot of photographic screenshots within the video game Second Life in the early 2000s. And so this piece in particular was kind of this study of the fundamental difference between photography taken in the real world and photography screenshot taken in the online virtual world. So both are very photographic. They can freeze movement, they can freeze moments in time. But when you take a photograph in the real world, photons, light photons, are interacting with each other, and there's a chemical reaction that occurs, whether you're taking it on film or a digital sensor. But for a photographic screenshot, there is no chemical reaction that occurs. Photons are computer generated. Light is basically computer generated. And so I'm dealing with natural light and shadow. So natural light from the sun is hitting the fence and creating shadow, but then this computer generated light is overlaid over it and also hitting the fence, kind of thinking about that. The last piece I'm going to be talking about is this one titled Cursor. This was one of the very first pieces I created for this body of work. This piece for me is all about this idea of agency. The cursor is kind of like this symbol of agency, how we control everything within a video game. We control our character or our tune and everything in the background through a cursor, and that cursor is controlled by our hands, by the mouse. So this mouse and this keyboard is like extensions of our body. Another part to this is that cursor is over a enlarged pixel block, and so at the end of the day, we're interacting with pixels. So another form of agency within this piece is the manipulation of the surface. It is curved because I manipulate it with my own physical hands and installed it in this very specific way. The curve kind of symbolizes this idea of the realities bending on one another, interacting with one another again, maybe in like a Mobius strip kind of way. And then the last part to this piece are the lights. We have a warmer light hitting it from this side and then a bluer light hitting it from that side. The warmer light kind of representing this natural physical sun or physical space, and then the blue light representing the screen and kind of blue light emissions coming from the screen. And then the last thing I'll talk about for this piece is printed on a kind of film see-through material. Once again, thinking about the screen, something that you look through and into and beyond to become immersed in these worlds. But that basically concludes the artist talk, so I will now open the floor up to any questions that you might have.
All right, questions or comments? You can just say you really like the install idea or playing with gels in the gallery too. So, because I like it. Well, it makes two different shadows, and I think it makes it really nice. That like nice, almost skin tone pink that comes out. I don't know, of the one shadow that's created on the wall.
Yeah, I was really happy with the two different shadows because for me that like drives the concept of these dualities, the virtual space and real space. So emphasizing that again with this one.
I have a couple clarification questions before the question I think I want to ask.
Yeah.
So are you saying with your, I guess, your work most broadly that there are digital realms and there are real space landscapes and that they do not meet under normal terms, and that your work is making them meet, or they should not be meeting but they are? What's happening there?
Yeah, so all this work is really through the lens of myself, and it's really kind of this story of the more time I spend in these virtual spaces, the more time I can kind of see these virtual spaces in reality. So the more time I'm spending, the more I'm dreaming of it, the more it's existing and helping me make decisions or forming my decisions outside of these spaces, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So when you're, I guess the first thing I would say is the real spaces that you experience have been shaped by the virtual world prior to your encounter. There is LiDAR that's used as part of landscape design. They'll do digital mock-ups. So you might want to think about that maybe the intersection isn't solely yourself, but it actually pre-exists you, that we've become virtual in a lot of ways. But setting that aside, if you're thinking about yourself, does yourself end where does yourself end in this project?
Good question. Thank you for that. So these, I guess, are kind of these weird preliminary studies in space and my interactions with them. There's kind of this new energy that is being breathed, that is breathing life into this work right now. And it has to do with kind of this own personal narrative that I'm having with my own family. So this past summer, even though I was away from Houston, I was able to spend a lot of my own personal time with my mother on a video game. And we were able to do things like hunting and fishing and cooking together with our tunes, you know, together in this space. And so even though we're like very physically apart, mentally we're close, right? And I'm also thinking about my own mother because she's getting older, right? And so she's not able to do things like hunting and fishing with me in the real world. And so I'm really becoming more interested in that in terms of like, I guess, in comparison to your question, my personal narrative into this work. And so in the future, I think I'm gonna explore more of that.
Great, yeah, because you also have an avatar body, right? So the self in video games is much more complex than or just your own, the bounds of your body. So there's a lot of rich things there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I'll tag on a question that might be related, but I'm really interested in the way you talk about growing up in virtual spaces. And so a lot of what I see is that intersection that you talk about quite a bit of between physical world and virtual world. But does time work that same way with the virtual space? Like how do you grow up in a virtual space? Is like this one.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so my exploration in time was really with that video work, and I was really in like just the different physics, like a simulated physics within the video game is just different in this space. And so that's why I was kind of doing this thing where I'm doing bits and pieces of different seasons in this non-linear fashion. But then overlaid is this linear video that is an exaggeration or an acceleration of our physics in time and space. In relation to your question, I don't know exactly how to answer it. I'm thinking about it more. But I think it is a very good question, how time is just different. When we take a screenshot of a photograph of World of Warcraft in 2010, you can recreate that exact screenshot today in World of Warcraft 2010 if you use the same version, right? And so there's no like, yes, there is kind of this like low polygon effect, which really tells the time of the piece, right? This early 2000s video game graphic aesthetic. And when you play video games today, it's so hyper realistic. So time is something I'm thinking of for sure. I just haven't thought of it more.
No, I think that's a great answer to hear about where your thinking is on that.
Thank you.
Just by chance, have you thought of, I was brought by the motion picture that was out in that other area? Have you thought about possibly separating images or colors and layers of the 80s, potentially, and then just present them as one piece, like in 3 or 4 layers, and so when the viewer walks around it, it maybe alters a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea. I mean, I love the idea of like how things kind of deconstruct themselves as you walk around it. That's why I made this piece. The more you step to the side, the more you kind of see it works on itself. But I like that idea too. I think I'll explore that one. Thank you.
Just thought.
I'm curious about your like relationship to the medium. Like you have photos here, you have video out there, and then this guy. And so like, I know you wanted to project it, so that would have said something else, but like you have the screen within a screen happening by using a TV. Like what would the projector have done differently? And like, what does each of these say? And like, cause you've obviously chosen them to be that medium for a reason. What would your relationship be to each of these selected mediums? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, it does.
It makes sense. Yeah, I don't know.
It's, you don't have to have the answer, just something to think about, like why these were photographs and those were videos. Like this is
Right.
your house.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, that looks like around campus, the one pictures. And so
Yeah.
like maybe there's a personal element to photographs for you. I don't know. So I think that's something to look at because you did do 3 different mediums and I think very purposely. You just have to
Yeah.
think about what that is.
Yeah, that's a good statement. The reason that is a video out there is because I think something that has motion to it, and especially multiple forms of motion, will inherently talk about time and this idea for attention. It's wanting you to stop and focus. Like I'm thinking about like YouTube and movies. When people look at the screen and they're watching a movie or YouTube, they're just completely enamored by the screen. Same with video games. There's a lot of movement involved. That was actually the first video I've ever really made, like video work. And I don't know, I think I was just thinking about motion. There's so much motion involved in video games that I wanted to work with it. Yeah, I don't know. Something I have to think about, I guess. Thank you.
No, I think, because it also makes me think about how the screen sort of, like, photographs are like a quick interaction, but as you said, like, we get sucked into video games. I've lost time.
Yeah.
A whole 24 hours to beat one video game, and I was like, oh, I just did that. So, like, I think there's something interesting in video, how it can sort of do that. Like, I think maybe it's the interaction of the viewer. I don't know.
Right.
But, thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? Yes.
So, even though what you're doing is this collision or joining between 2 different kinds of phenomenologies, right? Phenomenology simply meaning like how our bodies move through the space.
Mhm.
So on the one hand, you have like real world kind of phenomenology, right?
Yeah.
Versus like phenomenology of the digital world,
Mhm.
right? But I kind of feel like even though you're, again, making the collide, making the join, a lot of the join seems to be like very unpredictable and kind of, what things they spark. I wonder whether you're not paying enough attention or giving enough like space for digital phenomenology.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something to think about. I don't know how to answer that or talk about it.
Like I wonder whether Chow Fei's work, right, is a good example of like where she's really invested in like digital phenomenology, right?
Yeah.
Even though her work has a dimension where it's sort of intersecting with like the real world, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe going into more kind of like her work can sort of give you ideas of how you approach like the digital realm. It's kind of strange phenomenology.
Right, yeah. Maybe enacting more movement that can be captured within the digital spaces. That's something that I really enjoyed about Chow Fei's work. There's not a lot of movement in these digital spaces. They're quite static. So maybe employing more of that would be actually pretty interesting. I guess these, like I said, are just these preliminary studies of my own personal narrative and me growing up, but I would love to employ maybe work of like me and my mother, doing these actions in these digital realms. So I don't know, something I have to think about, I guess. Thank you.
Something I just wanted to say out loud that's occurring to me only right now because of what Kevin said, is as you're maneuvering through the digital realm, I mean, your physical body is doing things, and I'm thinking about like, is it all a mouse? What are the instruments that you use when you're in World of Warcraft? Is it all right here? Is it keyboard?
It's all just your hands. So instead of like walking and using your muscles in the real world and how you move around, everything is controlled through your hands. So it's like the mouse and the keyboard are this extension of your body, and that's how you control space and interact and manipulate with it. So
I think I just wanted to hear you describe that because it I don't know, it complicates what we think of as sort of like a total disembodiment, as when like we go into the digital screen and it's almost like our body is like vaporized or something, but like your body is at work, and I'm just kind of interested in that. It's also curious if you could talk just a little bit more about this piece. I'm interested in how it's installed because it makes me think of a specimen, because it's pinned, and it's so very different from the works that are bounded by the frame that sort of almost refuse to participate with the wall. To me, that's sort of the feeling that I have. Whereas here, like it's completely in conversation with the plane of the wall, the screen, the three-dimensional image. Can you talk a little bit more about the estimation of that piece? I didn't know. It sounded like Hillary said that maybe it was originally going to be a projection. Is that?
Oh, no, the video on the TV is going to be a projection.
Oh, fascinating. So that monitor TV was not originally.
yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, when I was making this piece, I wanted to kind of deconstruct the screen, I guess. When we look at a screen, when we're immersed in these video games or this online space, we don't really think about the screen. We think about just what we're looking at. We're kind of living inside this space. And I mean, going back to the idea of a mouse and keyboard, the more you're spending time on it, you don't even really feel the mouse or keyboard anymore. It really just becomes part of your body. It's like secondhand nature, all muscle memory. And it's just something you don't think about. It's like breathing in a way. You don't think about breathing. So for me, this is like just this deconstruction of taking the screen and separating it, this blue wall, and separating it away from it and having this projection. So when you look at it straight on, it's like this perfect kind of formatted rectangle, but then you step to the side, you start to see it a little bit more deconstructing itself, and then the projection behind it. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. I just wanted to hear more about it. It's interesting to me that it seems like there's so much about illusion that's in this conversation. I mean, this sort of synthetic landscapes of the virtual games that you're playing are creating the illusion of movement and depth, and the fact that you're getting the image to actually double itself onto the wall and create sort of even more tenuous illusion in there is fascinating to me that you're doing that. That's a physical thing that's in the room with us. That's thinking a lot about the physical.
Yeah. And dualities, there's dualities in all of this work for me. And so that duality of shadows is very important, I think, for me in the piece as well.
Maybe the interesting thing about this is the way the rectangle seems to come back even as you're trying to deconstruct it. So what's the problem of the frame, right? And maybe the frame is something that you need to think a little bit more about. Of course, all of these works, right? And also in like video games, what's kind of like on the blind spot of our vision or awareness, which is still there or necessary to have the whole medium kind of do being,
Yeah. That's interesting. Thank you.
I just have a really small question. I just wondered what you mean when you said that being immersed in these video games changes your decisions and your thinking and your interacting in the actual world.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. So I grew up in these online spaces, and I've made friends with so many people, hundreds of people throughout my life, and I've never even seen their face. I know them by their avatar and their tune and their name, and that's it, And similarly, I've had relationships with all of these lands that I can't physically touch. And so all of these interactions and living in this space and interacting with other people online but not just people, like NPCs and their stories that were created by the developers, has kind of shaped me and my humor and my personality. And that then helps me make decisions or drives my decisions in the real world as I grew up. So yes, molded by the internet, but the internet interacting within this virtual world as well. It's like a machine talking to the machine talking to me, and me talking to the machine as well. Yeah, a lot of the machine.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was trying to think about how to like put this work in dialogue with some of your earlier work.
Yeah.
And like when you started last year, you were doing work that was kind of focused on expedition photography.
Yeah.
And like the perception and the aestheticization and possession of indigenous places through photography.
Yeah.
And we talked quite a bit about like some of the complicated ethical moral questions that are tied to that. And so I think something interesting that has happened here where you've gone away from actual physical landscapes into virtual landscapes. And it's those questions about like possession and the relationship of the self to that, those landscapes are gone now. Like you say, like this is something that has shaped it. You're like fully owning it as part of your subjectivity and your psychology. And kind of the takeaway from this that is like it shapes your actions in the real world. And so I'm wondering like what kind of license does the virtual give to possession? What is your like relationship to the landscape within these games and like looking at them, visually possessing them in a way that like photography does? And then how does that reflect on your sense of possession in the real world? Because now we're taking places and turning them into your inner subjectivities in a sense by projecting these games onto them. And that seems like a very different place than where you started.
Yeah. Could you rephrase the question?
Yeah, what kind of license does the virtual give to possession? That would be my core question. What does it mean to possess or seek to possess landscape within a virtual space? How does that change you when you are also out of that space?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I don't know, when I think of virtual worlds, they're created by artists, right? And they're developed by other people, and then you interact with them. So the creator, at the end of the day, is someone living in California. But they're getting these creations from reference photos of the real worlds, and so they're transferring that. They're transferring visuals of actual landscapes into virtual. And so there's that transferring going on, and then now I'm transferring my visuals or seeing. I don't know how to describe that. It's something to think about, though. I don't think I can answer your question, but I don't know.
Because when you're in the game, you're consuming the landscape too.
Yeah.
And in the same way that like 19th century collectors of Hudson River School landscapes were consuming the landscape, but it's now a virtual landscape. So in some way, the question of like the morality of it is evacuated. You're not thinking about that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, is it the case? Does it affect you as a subject?
I think it does. I mean, in a way, I'm still consuming land because it's back to the idea of like these are inspired and created from actual lands and places, right? And so I'm still kind of consuming it, and I don't know. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I don't have an answer to it. I just thought it might be an interesting avenue to explore a little bit further.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody, and thank you, Josh. That was beautiful. And now we have Cassandra, Cassandra, over there. Do you want me to unmute it? Do you want me to unmute it? We can turn it down and unmute it? Yeah. Okay. A little bit. I'll turn it back up to 20. We'll do 10. Okay. She has a handout that goes with this piece.
Yes, so I will just pass this back around if you can just take one. If you already